it started to rain. It's actually not raining in some parts. Let's see if we can find a dry spot or not. And what did I read today? I thought this was kind of interesting at first. You heard about that news recently, how in the US, they're proposing to implement this CCP Drones Act of sort, I guess, to ban Chinese-made drones such as DJI for things such as security reasons. And it was kind of interesting, I guess, just hearing people like the committee's comments on the reasoning why they should, I suppose, enforce this law of sorts. So there were a couple of points I found interesting, which you could actually see what it's like, I guess, to be people who aren't tech savvy or they're relying on expert opinions and all that. So the first thing they kind of dive into is how the fear is because this is a China-based company and there are those rules where they say, if you're based in China, for example, if the Communist Party says, give up all your data and so forth, they technically have to say, yes, sir, and cooperate. So that's the first thing they kind of made in terms of the point anyways on why they need to enforce those types of potential laws.
In regard to China's national security law, which is something I think you probably have good familiarity with. Could China use that national security law to hack Americans or Taiwanese or Hong Kong backgrounds to disrupt them financially or even coerce their businesses that into ending up supporting Hong Kong, Taiwan, or even to get them to stop raising the issue of violation of human rights? Do you see that as a vulnerability there?
Absolutely. The key challenge is that the 2017 law has no end. The scope is nearly boundless.
I've come to understand the problem of Chinese espionage is staggering, particularly since the passage of China's 2017 National Intelligence Act. Every single Chinese company is an asset of China's national intelligence network, no matter where they operate.
Securing our nation's telecommunications systems, and I support Representative Stefanik's legislation to expand the language to DJI. Mr. Singleton, what national security risks do Chinese-made drones pose, and how would including DJI on the covered equipment list address those risks?
DJI presents, I think, a catastrophic risk to U.S. national security. I think when you look at how the company was born out of the Chinese government through direct investments, when you look at how it's used every day to surveil concentration camps in Xinjiang province, to monitor Uyghurs, its use on the battlefield in Russia against Ukraine. There are myriad examples in which this technology, while very advanced, and I know a lot of people have DJI drones, they don't quite understand the links to China's military and how data flows can be potentially exploited down the road as China harnesses all of this data, which Chinese, Communist Party Chairman Xi Jinping refers to data as the 21st century oil. They don't quite understand what they're going to do with all this information. I absolutely agree with
But they'll have it.
But they'll have it. And by applying big data capability on top of it, they're preparing for a future environment where they could potentially operationalize all of this data to further their strategic interests.
So overall, I guess the argument from that perspective is people have to think of the long term on how just using those products and the Communist Party having that type of leverage on a company in terms of people's data, then you should, I guess, get rid of it for various applications. But one of the other interesting thing I found in this whole, discussion is they talked about things, for example, like DJI's Geofence. And as most of you know who use, for example, like DJI products, that's one of the most, irritating part of their products, like their drones, these geofences that don't actually match local laws, but they can dictate, for example, where you can fly and where you can't. And with this, they kind of have like a perspective where, well, a company shouldn't have this kind of ability to, let's just say, disable drones in an entire region. I guess the fear there, for example, would be, let's just say, US people, if they decide, hey, we don't want all these guys ever flying, they can flip a switch, for example, and disable everything. So you can kind of hear that here.
Mr. Singleton, how about CCP-controlled drone companies? Do you believe it's a good or a bad idea that these drones are being used in the United States that are linked to Communist China?
Sorry, absolutely. DJI sits at the heart of China's military-civil fusion strategy, which breaks down barriers between the civilian and military institutions to mobilize the former in service of the latter. So DJI drones collect vast amounts of sensitive data everything from high-resolution images of critical infrastructure to facial recognition technology and remote sensors that can measure even an individual's heart rate. Compounding the DJI risk is their capacity for geofencing. So they can use GPS data, or using GPS data, DJI can decide whether one of its drones will function in a given area, allowing the company to turn down or turn off entire fleets of drones. I think the ability to deactivate American drones shouldn't be entrusted to a foreign entity, least of which the CCP.
Now, of course, for that to work theoretically, people would have to update their firmware, for example, because the drone has to have updated software and all that to tell them, hey, this is the restricted zone, so you technically can't just flip a switch and everyone will be grounded just like that, unless people are magically, I guess, installing firmware updates without their knowledge, for example. That would be a little different, but it's kind of fascinating because, again, you'd think with DJI implementing things like those geofence, they'd get government, I guess, support and approval, like, hey, you can control your drones to stop people, I don't know, flying from controlled airspace and all that. But it just seems like it's the complete opposite so far in terms of that plan, huh? It's being used against them in almost every way. So interesting perspective, in my opinion, again, where if you're someone who doesn't use the tech and all that, you can see what type of information they're getting to kind of determine the direction they should potentially go in terms of laws and all that. And with that thought, in terms of war, still a lot of conflict between Ukraine and Russia. And how about this one? Basically, drones are playing a big role. And this one says, drones are key in Ukraine's fight against Russia. Now it wants 1 million more of them. Nimble, unmanned devices allow Ukraine to survey Russian troops and attacks targets at low costs. The Ukraine-Russia war has become a proving ground for what drones can do in conflict. Ukrainian forces have used small first-person view drones to blow up Russian tanks on their soil and longer-range devices to damage military aircraft in Russia. Drone attacks this winter have hit oil refineries deep inside Russian territory, as well as major steel factory. Explosive-laden naval drones have slammed into Russian ships. With the war now in its third year, Ukraine is leaning hard into drones as a combat strategy, ramping up its domestic production and counting on allies to deliver 1 million of them in the next 12 months. I guess with that thought, there's no signs of, I guess, stopping in terms of this war and all that. Although with that thought, in terms of the previous story, is that something you would be concerned about, where if there's a country that's so heavily reliant on another to use their tech and all that, what happens if they get into a war? Would you agree with that notion of, oh, they can just flip a switch, for example, disable everyone's tools and resources? So with that thought, they say you should ban them all. Like, what would you think with that, I guess, mindset? All right, see you guys later.